1980s, Mediterranean Sea, calm waters below, tense skies above. The Cold War may have been cold on paper, but over the Gulf of Sidra, the temperature was rising fast. Aboard the USS Nimitz, American radar operators tracked every blip with razor-sharp focus. The F-14 Tomcat crews were already strapped in, silent, disciplined, waiting for the sky to burst open. Their mission was simple: defend the fleet. Yet everyone knew one wrong move could ignite an international explosion. Far across the sea, inside a dimly lit operations tent in Libya, Soviet military advisors stood behind Libyan officers, watching radar screens flicker. For them, this wasn't just another patrol. This was a test of Soviet tactics, Soviet aircraft, and Soviet doctrine. If the Americans blinked, the Libyans were ready to strike. And the advisors wanted to see how U.S. pilots reacted under pressure. 2 Libyan MiG-23s lifted off, climbing into the warm coastal air. Their engines screamed as they accelerated north, locking onto the American combat air patrol. Soviet advisors nodded quietly. The MiGs were fast, reliable, and built for interception. If they get close, one Soviet murmured, the Tomcats will back off. That was the expectation. But the American F-14 crews weren't in the mood to play defensive. High above the water, the Tomcats glided like steel predators. Their AWG-9 radar locked onto the approaching MiGs long before visual contact. Voices crackled through the comms, calm but sharp. 2 bandits inbound. No response to warnings. Stay on them, weapons tight, but ready. In the Libyan command center, Soviet advisors watched the radar symbols tighten. The MiGs pushed forward aggressively, their pilots confident that American fighters wouldn't risk escalation. But they were wrong, very wrong. Back in the Tomcat cockpit, the pilot kept his voice steady. Contact at 60 miles. Hostile intent confirmed. The Rio flipped a switch. The missile tone echoed. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath. The Soviet advisors leaned closer to the radar screens, unaware that they were seconds away from witnessing a moment that would rewrite everything they believed about American air combat tactics. The stage was set. The distance was closing. And in less than a minute, the world would watch 2 powerful fighters vanish from the sky. So fast that even seasoned Soviet officers were frozen in disbelief. The 2 Libyan MiG-23s sliced through the sky at high speed, their powerful Tomansky engines leaving long ribbons of heat in the air. Inside their cockpits, both pilots received updates from ground control, updates heavily influenced by the Soviet advisors standing behind the radar operators. Continue forward. Push them. Americans won't engage first. A Soviet officer instructed quietly. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence based on years of doctrine. But today, doctrine was about to fail. On board the USS Nimitz, the mood had shifted from calm vigilance to electric tension. The operations center was a hive of activity. Screens glowing, hands moving rapidly over consoles, voices speaking in short, controlled bursts. The American commanders had issued multiple radio warnings to the MiGs, but the Libyan jets continued to close the gap. At 40 miles, the Tomcats locked into an offensive posture. The pilots' breathing steadied. Hands tightened around throttles. The aircrew didn't want conflict, but they were trained for this exact moment. Trained for decisiveness, speed, and lethal precision. Inside one F-14, the Rio watched sweeping green lines across the radar scope. They're accelerating, he reported. Copy, the pilot replied. Let's finish this dance. The MiGs dipped slightly, a move that, in Soviet tactical manuals, signaled an attempt to gain a launch position. To the Tomcat crews, this wasn't a dance anymore, it was a threat. American rules of engagement were crystal clear. Hostile intent allows defensive action. And hostile intent was now undeniable. The first Tomcat turned smoothly into a firing angle. All right, I've got tone on lead MiG, the Rio said. The pilot responded, Fox 1, launching. A Sparrow missile shot off the rail, disappearing into the blue with a long white streak. The Libyan pilots heard their threat warning system scream, but by the time they tried to react, the missile had already closed the distance. In the Libyan operations tent, Soviet advisors stiffened. What was that? Did they fire? An officer asked. The advisor's jaw clenched as he leaned toward the screen. That was a missile. Seconds later, a blinking MiG icon vanished from the radar. Gone. Erased. The tent fell silent for a moment. Libyan officers looked at one another, bewildered. The Soviet advisors exchanged tense glances. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The Americans were never meant to fire first. Not this quickly, not this confidently, not with this kind of precision. But there was no time to process the shock. Because the second MiG was still airborne, and the Tomcats were already adjusting their angles, repositioning with deadly fluidity. High above, the surviving Libyan pilot shouted into his radio, trying to break away, trying to find a vector where the American radar couldn't reach him. But the Tomcat behind him had already locked on. Inside the American cockpit, second bandit attempting to evade. Stay with him. He's not leaving this engagement. The Soviet advisors leaned over the radar stations again. Hearts pounding, eyes wide. This wasn't a duel. This wasn't even a dogfight. This was a demonstration of what happened when U.S. technology, training, and readiness collided with outdated expectations. And the final blow was only seconds away. The lone surviving MiG-23 banked sharply left, its wings trembling from the sudden maneuver. The pilot's breathing grew heavy as he pulled back on the stick, trying desperately to break the American lock. His warning lights blazed, sirens echoing in his helmet. He wasn't just evading missiles, he was fighting pure panic. In the Libyan command tent, Soviet advisors leaned over the radar consoles. "This one is maneuvering hard," a Libyan officer muttered. The senior Soviet advisor exhaled slowly. He knows he's next. This wasn't bravado anymore, this was dread. Back in the sky, the F-14 behind the MiG held its position flawlessly. Its swept-back wings cut the air with precise fluidity. The Tomcat was built for moments like this, combining raw engine power with complex radar and missile technology. And its crew operated like a single mind, reading the MiG's every move. Bandit turning. I see him. He's not breaking the lock. Fox 2, launching Sidewinder. With that calm phrase, a Sidewinder missile streaked from the Tomcat's wing. The missile locked onto the MiG's heat signature instantly, spiraling upward with a predatory howl. Even at full throttle, the MiG couldn't outrun it. In the Libyan tent, the second radar blip flickered. Soviet advisors tensed. Then, gone. Another icon vanished from the screen. The room erupted in confused voices. What happened? That's impossible. They shot both of them down? The senior Soviet advisor stood frozen, staring at the radar scope like it had betrayed physics itself. For years, he had trained Libyan pilots in Soviet doctrine. Intercept aggressively, close distance, pressure the enemy into retreat. That doctrine had just been crushed in less than a minute. Back in the air, the Tomcats remained steady, cutting a wide arc to ensure no further threats were inbound. Their radios crackled. Splash 2. No additional bandits detected. Copy that. Maintain CAP position. Roger. Returning to station. But inside the cockpits, the pilots felt the adrenaline slowly fade. This wasn't triumph. This was the heavy silence that follows a deadly encounter. One nobody had wanted, but all had been prepared for. Hours later, the news spread like wildfire across military channels. Analysts studied the engagement frame by frame. NATO aircrews replayed the radar data in disbelief. Even in Soviet circles, whispers grew louder. How did they do it so fast? How did the Tomcats lock on so early? What systems are they using? Yet nothing compared to the shock felt by the Soviet advisors who witnessed it firsthand. They had expected an American retreat. They had expected hesitation. They had expected weakness. Instead, they saw ruthless efficiency, 2 MiGs erased in 45 seconds. And somewhere deep inside, they understood a truth no one wanted to admit. The skies over the Mediterranean were ruled by the Tomcat. By evening, the Mediterranean horizon glowed orange as the sun dipped behind distant waves. But neither the color nor the quiet brought peace to the Libyan command tent. Officers whispered in tight clusters. Radios hissed. Papers shuffled. Yet beneath the noise, one thing hung in the air like a weight: shock. The Soviet advisors stood together near the main radar console, each replaying the confrontation in their minds. They had watched the MiGs approach with confidence. They had expected a tactical dance, maybe some maneuvering, maybe a show of force. But nothing had prepared them for the brutal efficiency of the Tomcats' response. One advisor broke the silence. 45 seconds, he murmured. Another nodded slowly. 2 fighters, gone in less than a minute. Their faces carried the same expression, an uneasy blend of disbelief and forced professionalism. Because what happened today wasn't just a loss for Libya. It was a blow to the credibility of Soviet doctrine itself. Across the sea, the USS Nimitz stood calm and massive, a floating city in steel. Inside the ready room, the American pilots removed their helmets, exhaustion lining their faces. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They simply sat quietly, letting the reality sink in. One Rio rubbed his eyes and sighed. That escalated fast. His pilot nodded. Faster than anyone wanted. Because everyone knew that the shootdown wouldn't remain a simple tactical encounter. It would become a symbol studied, debated, argued about. Military analysts would tear it apart. Politicians would use it. And pilots on both sides of the Cold War would measure themselves against it. Hours later, the Soviets sent their report up the chain. They described the American missile accuracy, the radar advantage, the reaction speed. But between the lines, something unspoken lingered. The Americans reacted before we expected them to. They struck faster than we believed possible. And they did not miss. On the deck of the Nimitz, the night shift took over. Jets were secured. The sea hummed softly below. The Tomcats sat silently under floodlights, cold, predatory shapes at rest, as if the encounter had been just another routine patrol. But for the Soviets, this event would echo for years. Their analysis revealed something uncomfortable. The F-14's radar, missiles, and crew coordination formed a combination they were not prepared for. The tactical assumptions they'd relied upon were outdated. And the MiG-23, once trusted, now seemed painfully vulnerable. In training halls across Eastern Europe, instructors began quietly adjusting their lectures. In briefing rooms, pilots asked new questions. And in political circles, the incident was whispered about with a mix of concern and irritation. Because the message was undeniable. When the Tomcat takes the sky, hesitation is fatal. And for the Soviet advisors who had watched 2 radar blips vanish in under a minute, the moment became a memory they would never forget. A chilling reminder that air superiority isn't claimed by theory or doctrine. It's claimed by the fighter that strikes first, strikes fast, and finishes the fight before anyone else even understands what happened.